If the term supporting protagonist doesn't seem to ring a bell, that's because it's not an established trope, at least not officially. You've never heard of this trope, or should I say non-trope, because, well, it's never really been acknowledged, nor does it appear very often in movies or books at all. In the vast lake of media, this character trope is hardly a dewdrop. However, it undeniably exists, and few bold writers have tried their hand at using this unseemly twist in stories, either by accident or on purpose. And as I said before, the trope usually goes unnoticed or met with visceral backlash. I, for one, love to see it, and would hope for such a thing to finally become more mainstream. So, if you are a reader, or someone who is fond of rare and unique tropes, or a writer like myself who would love to expand their horizons and stand out among other writers, then let me tell you about the rarest trope of all. Hello listeners, DJ messing with you. Before you drive down literary lane, do be a dear and give this video a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm find my videos. Subscribe for more content, and finally, don't get me started. I've dubbed this trope the supporting protagonist to define a character whose role shifts from being a secondary character to becoming the unexpected hero of someone else's story. This may show up in various forms. Ideally, the supporting protagonist is not seen for much of the story, or at least the majority of the story is not told from their perspective. However, in some cases, they may be the main character, though it is unclear whether they meet the benchmark of qualifications to be called a true protagonist. Whichever side of the coin we are referring to, there are a few definite characteristics that constitute a supporting protagonist. 1. They are extremely thematically passive. Possibly the most notable trait of the supporting protagonist is their lack of agency and plot impact. Not only might they find themselves amidst a conflict they never asked to be part of, but for every exciting thing that happens to drive the plot forward, very little of it can be attributed to them. Sounds pretty boring, right? Not exactly. It's not that they don't do anything, it's that their approach to leading us to the final victory is very indirect. Expect to see small moves made by these characters. After all, this is what makes them so subversive. Sometimes they don't even think they make much of an impact, until the opposite is confirmed later in the story. Take, for example, Mr. Heap from M. Night Shyamalan's psychological thriller, Lady in the Water. The movie itself is infamous for its subversion of common tropes, and its cheeky, not-so-subtle protest at critics for their out-of-touch criticisms and restrictions on inspired writing. As you could probably guess, it offended the right people. But whether you agree with the film's message or even enjoyed it, there is something to be said about its uniqueness. In fact, quite a lot to be said about the hidden meaning behind the entire plot. Though I'll defer you to another YouTuber, Otherworldly Fiction, who I think does a far better job explaining it than I could. Cleveland Heap is the main character of the movie and thus the person we follow around the most. He is introduced to us as a humble apartment complex's superintendent with a chronic stutter and a traumatic past he doesn't like to bring up. His conflict arises when a strange girl of very significant and supernatural importance rises from the water, soon becoming a temporary dependent to Cleveland and tasking him with finding everyone in the story who could possibly help Story with her, story. Again, I am not trying to get too deep into it, but if you have watched the movie, you remember how, despite Cleveland's protection of the girl, he is not the one whose role is to save the damsel in distress. You see, almost each character in this movie is quite explicitly told how they are relevant to the bedtime story. Cleveland, as we find out much later, is the healer, not the hero. This might lead many to see all of his efforts throughout the film as useless after all. But being a personal scout for Story, the girl/Narf, was action. Not bombs and smoke action, but he did play a key role in orchestrating the gathering of the guild, as well as healing Story when she is badly wounded. We don't see the movie through the eyes of the actual protector because it is through Cleveland's eyes that we see belief, hope, and a deeper meaning to be explored. Like any good protagonist, Cleveland has his redemption arc. His vicinity to story adds more relevance to his character than anyone else, and his willingness to help her grounds him as the true vessel through which the story should be told. While he may not fit the hero's stereotype, he does have what any hero should: heart. Bringing us to our next trait. 2. They have a strong moral compass.
Could you just not breathe?
However flawed the supporting protagonist may be in their decision-making or bereavement of active pursuit, they do have common sense. This may at first go undetectable until the supporting protagonist is met with a choice that conflicts with their innate understanding of right and wrong. Ernest Menville from the comedic thriller Death Becomes Her is a perfect example of this. At first glance, Ernest is a pushover, an easily manipulated plastic surgeon who allows himself to be dominated by the two narcissistic women in his life, Madeline and Helen. He isn't the typical hero, nor does he have much control over the chaos unfolding around him. In fact, for most of the film, he is merely a pawn in their selfish immortal feud. But what makes Ernest a supporting protagonist is that despite his flaws and lack of agency, his moral compass remains intact. Though he enables Madeline and Helen's toxic rivalry for years, when faced with the ultimate choice to join them in their undying vanity or break free, he makes the surprising decision to reject their offer of immortality. This is a turning point. It's not a grand heroic moment in the traditional sense, no climactic battle, no grand speech.
I don't want to live forever. I mean, it sounds good, but what am I gonna do? What if I get bored?
What?
And what if I get lonely? Who am I gonna hang around with, Madeline and Helen?
But you never grow old.
Yes, but everybody else will. I don't think this is right. This is not a dream, this is a nightmare. You people all have to be stopped!
But it's a definitive act of self-respect and a subtle declaration of his true nature. In the end, Ernest doesn't win in the typical Hollywood sense, nor does he become the dominant force driving the story forward, but his quiet, morally grounded decision is what ultimately separates him from the doomed fates of Madeline and Helen. He may not be the one saving the world, but he is saving himself, and in doing so, he proves that he is the true heart of the story, embodying a moral that breathes on long after his character leaves the stage.
And it is my opinion that our beloved Ernest is one man who will indeed live forever.
Blah, 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 blah.
3. They are secretly the most powerful character. The supporting protagonist will often appear weaker than the hero or chosen one, or really any powerful figure. They may lack physical strength, combat skills, or traditional heroic traits, leading audiences to underestimate their true significance. However, beneath the surface, they often possess a strength that is far more vital, one that ultimately determines the fate of the story. A perfect example of this is Tripitaka or Tang Sanzang from Journey to the West. Unlike his powerful disciples Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, Zhu Baji, Pigsy, or Shabu Jing, Sandy, Tripitaka is a mere mortal. He is physically weak, naive, and constantly in need of protection. Sun Wukong, in particular, is the group's undisputed warrior, wielding supernatural strength, speed, and an indestructible staff. Compared to him, Tripitaka seems utterly helpless. However, despite his lack of martial prowess, Tripitaka is the most important figure in the journey. His strength lies not in combat, but in his spiritual purity and unwavering moral compass. He is the only one capable of completing the pilgrimage to retrieve the sacred scriptures, a mission that none of his immensely powerful disciples could achieve on their own. Even Sun Wukong, despite his godlike abilities, is bound by the magical headband Tripitaka placed upon him, proving that the monk has a unique kind of control over the group's strongest member. Tripitaka's presence is what allows his companions to grow. Sun Wukong, once an arrogant and reckless troublemaker, becomes wiser and more disciplined under Tripitaka's guidance. Though Wukong's strength is undeniable, it is Tripitaka's wisdom and spiritual merit that ultimately lead them to enlightenment. In this way, Tripitaka's influence is more profound than any single act of strength. To reiterate, The supporting protagonist's power is rarely flashy. It doesn't manifest through grand battles or epic feats. Instead, it is often quiet, indirect, and easy to overlook. But in the end, it is the force that truly changes the story's world. Alright everyone, those are the only 3 characters I know of who fit this non-trope, but what do you think? Has this video made you think of any other characters who fall into this category? Or maybe you have your own take on the idea. Either way, I would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's keep the discussion going. Thanks for watching!